Chapter 2 of Daggers and Dignity. There's a silence in the morning that doesn't quite feel like peace. It's the hush before the hammer falls, the weight of a held breath. That's the silence we sat in. The prison cart hadn't moved. Not yet. It sat heavy on its wheels, iron-banded and bristling with chains, as if even it was reluctant to carry the lights of us. Outside, the yard stretched empty in the pale hush before dawn, waiting like we were, for orders, for purpose, for someone to decide what came next. I sat near the corner, knees drawn up, fingers curled in the dust on the floor. The wood was cold, slick with the dew of morning fog, and the breath of too many souls crammed too close. My wrist ached from the shackles, though they were looser now, more gesture than guard. But it wasn't the steel that made me feel bound. It was the emptiness. There's a kind of stillness that comes from being cut off from magic. Not pain, not even loss. Just silence. Like when you enter a room and forget why you came. Like the sound of your own name spoken in a language you can no longer remember. The weed was still there. I could feel it. Even now, flowing faintly through the wood, the stone, the air itself. But it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Without my spellbook, I couldn't shape it, couldn't speak to it, couldn't be me. A wizard without a book is like a brewer without a barrel. Worse, really. Barrels don't define you. But magic was breath, and I was holding mine. Across from me, Thorak leaned against the wall with the familiarity of a man who'd been thrown into worse. His arms were crossed, his chin tucked, his eyes closed, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. He was conserving, like a hearth fire banking its coals, waiting for the next blow to stoke it. Tara sat with her back to the bars, legs drawn up beneath her like a mountain cat, curled for warmth. The dirt in her hair had dried, and in the low light, she looked half-carved from the stone she spoke to. She hadn't said a word since we'd been loaded into the cart, but she hadn't needed to. Silence suited her, like a blade in its sheath. Ryu was nearest the barred window, his profile soft in the gray light. He watched the empty yard like a priest waiting for signs. If the wind spoke to him, it kept its voice low today. We were an odd collection of souls. A dwarven scholar, a drunken warrior, a wild-blooded gnome, and a foreign healer with the storm in his bones. We had fought together the night before, survived together, and now we waited together. For the guards, for the cart to lurch forward, for fate to remember we were here. The sound of creaking leather and the dull clop of hooves on stone echoed through the empty courtyard. We all turned slow, instinctive, as a low rider passed by the front of the wagon. He was a dwarf like me, but that's where the similarities ended. His armor gleamed like a polished oath, every buckle and plate perfectly placed, more for show than for war. He rode like he was born to it, back straight, chin high, the reins held loose in one hand with the arrogance of command. The kind of dwarf whose boots had never touched the mines, but who thought himself deep because he could quote a lineage 10 names long. But I wasn't looking at his face. My eyes went to his belt, to the daggers. One was broad and brutal, thick-bladed with a worn grip, clearly made for use, not show. The sort of weapon passed down by warriors, not lords. Its leather sheath was cracked from age and travel, the metal dark, with old polish and older blood. The other, my breath caught. The other was mine. Not just any blade, not just a weapon. My clan dagger. It hung from his side like an afterthought. Sheathed in worn leather, the iron pommel etched with the unmistakable knotwork of the iron-band line. I would have known it anywhere. The hilt was nicked from where I dropped it in the Shadow Vale. The sheath still bore the faint burn from the summer I'd fallen asleep too close to the campfire. It was my great-grandfather's dagger. Bertram Ironvein, brewer of tales, riddler of words, firelighter of the minds. He'd given me that blade the night I cast my first spell. He said every dwarf needs 2 tools, one to open doors and one to open minds. Magic, he said, for the mind, steel for the rest. Most dwarves carried a clan dagger out of duty. I carried mine out of love. Bertram had raised me when no one else could, taught me to think, to question, to laugh. He used riddles like chisels, carving wisdom into the corners of my young, stubborn skull. It was his stories of distant peaks and long-lost ruins that first lit the sparks of wonder in me. That wonder became curiosity. That curiosity became magic. And that dagger, that was the last piece of him I had on this world. Seeing it there, hanging from the belt of a stranger, set something cold and ancient stirring in my chest. I stood, not quickly, but with the kind of slow, deliberate purpose that draws eyes whether it means to or not. "Oi!" I called out, my voice hoarse from disuse. "You there! That dagger at your side! It's mine!" The rider turned only slightly, just enough to look down his nose from atop his polished saddle. His eyes were pale, cold, and unimpressed. "You lost it," he said flatly. "It's not yours anymore." I stepped closer to the bars, gripping them as if they might hold me steady. "That's my clan dagger. It was passed to me by my great-grandfather, and you have no claim to it." The dwarf's lips curled. "Any dwarf too weak to hold on to their clan dagger," he said, voice like cut granite, "is no dwarf at all. You've disgraced your name. That blade deserves better than to rust on the hip of a coward." His words struck harder than any club. Behind me, a sharp intake of breath. "Hold on," he said, voice low and growing hotter. "That other dagger, where'd you get that?" The rider glanced down, almost lazily. "This?" he said, tapping the hilt with a gloved finger. "Some drunk dropped it during the scuffle. Didn't even notice it was gone. A shame, really. It's a fine blade." Thorak's face darkened like a storm front. "That was my father's," he growled. "I earned it in the Battle of Dustmere. You've got no right." "Ha!" The imperious dwarf laughed, a single, clipped bark that made my fist clench. "No right," he echoed. "You two are in chains, wasting breath in a prison cart. You've no right to anything. If your ancestors could see what you've become, they'd weep. Or better yet, they'd scratch your names from the stone and let the moss have the shame." I took a step forward, the bars creaking with the shift of weight. "Say what you want about me," I said, voice shaking, not with fear but with fury. "But don't you dare speak for my grandfather. You're not fit to polish his boots." The rider's smile was thin as wire. "Enjoy the ride, mutts," he said, spitting at our feet. "Maybe you'll find your spines before the end." He turned his horse without another word, the sound of hooves against stone fading into the morning haze. Thorak swore under his breath, knuckles white on the iron bars. I said nothing. But I made a promise then, silent and stone deep. I will take back that dagger, one way or another. The dust settled, if only just. Thorak grumbled something rude under his breath and slumped back to the bench like a landslide receding. Tara hadn't moved, but I could feel the tension coiled in her, quiet and hard as bedrock. Ree sat as he had before, his expression unchanged, but his fingers moved like they were feeling for a current just beneath the surface of the world. And me? I stared out through the bars, breath thin, the sting of the insult still settling like smoke in my chest. Then, clink! The latch rattled, and the wagon door scraped open with a reluctant groan. A guard muttered something unintelligible and tossed the figure inside. He landed with a grunt and a puff of dust, like a sack of forgotten potatoes. "Mind the edge, why don't you?" came the voice, dry as autumn leaves and twice as brittle. The figure pushed himself up, short, stocky, and caked in a kind of dirt that clings to you like memory. A halfling. Not young, but not yet old. Sandy hair stuck out at odd angles like he'd slept in a hayloft or a grave. His eyes were wide and gray, too large for his narrow face, darting about the wagon with quick, measured glances. "Well then," he said, brushing off his ragged clothing and giving us a grin that was half apology, half dare. "Quite the welcoming party. Name's Jasper. I presume I found myself in the Misfits cart?" No one answered. He patted his sides, adjusted his filthy sackcloth shirt, and then, casually, like he was reaching for a handkerchief, pulled something from beneath it. A book. Not just any book. My book. Bound in dark leather, worn soft by years of use, the cover scorched on one corner from an arcane mishap, the spine held together with thread dyed blue with river ink from the Delver's Ford. And inside was everything. My magic, yes, but beyond that, my formulas, my sigils, my careful annotations on the meta-magic variations of elemental shaping, but also equally precious to me, my notes and my recipes. Pages and pages of mead and ale experiments, mountain fire malt, elderberry wine, frost-cap stout, most of them crossed out, rewritten, annotated with tiny angry scrawlings and hopeful exclamations. Whole sections on herb lore gathered from roadside chats with caravan healers and drunken gargers. All of it. Years of wandering and wonder I thought lost. And here it was, in the hands of a dirt-street halfling with eyes too big. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Jasper held it out with both hands, almost reverently. "This yours? Found it in the guardroom next to a busted footlocker and half a roasted duck." I reached for it like a starving man offered bread. My fingers touched the leather, and something inside me clicked back into place. I was whole again. I hadn't even finished tracing my fingers over the cover, half believing it would vanish again, when I heard a voice cut through the reverence like a stone through glass. "Convenient," Tara said, her tone dry enough to parch the air. A stranger drops into our wagon carrying a wizard's lost spellbook, like it's nothing more than a loaf of bread. Forgive me if I'm not clapping just yet. Jasper didn't flinch. If anything, he looked mildly impressed. He sat cross-legged on the floor and gave a short bow of the head in her direction. "Aye, fair point," he said. "But I promise, I'm not clever enough to fake that level of luck." "Or just clever enough," she muttered, arms crossed. Ryu glanced at her, then back at Jasper, serene but watchful. Thorak grunted and leaned his head back against the wall, not bothering to weigh in. Jasper sighed, brushing a hand through his wild hair. "Look, I wager I've been in this prison longer than any of you. Got pinched for stealing food, not my proudest moment. But the stew smelt better than my moral compass that day." He paused, letting the quiet settle. "Last night, when things started shaking and screaming, I figured it was now or never. My cell lock was old, rusted through in places, took a bit of wiggling and a well-placed elbow, but I slipped out where the guards were too busy dealing with whatever calamity was unfolding." My fingers tightened slightly on the spellbook. He glanced at me and grinned. "Made my way to the guardroom. Thought maybe I'd find a key or a way out. What I found was a half-eaten duck leg and that beautiful book laying beside it." Tara narrowed her eyes. "And you just took it?" "Well, no offense, but they weren't exactly treating it like a sacred artifact," he said, motioning to the book. "So, I tucked it in my belt, ate what I could without choking, and then, surprise, a guard found me licking grease from my fingers." He patted his chest. Didn't even have time to pretend I belonged there. But I held on to the book, figured it might be worth something. Wasn't expecting it to belong to someone in the very same cart I got tossed into. I looked at him then. Really looked. Dirt-caked, barefoot, eyes too wide, too clever, and yet no deceit in his voice, just mischief and maybe a hint of pride. I exhaled. Jasper, was it? He nodded. Thank you, I said softly, my thumb resting on the spine of the book. You have no idea what this means to me. Oh, I've got a few ideas, he said with a grin, but I'll take your word for it. Tara didn't smile, but she didn't press further. That, from her it seemed, was practically applause. The quiet stretched again, like a breath none of us wanted to release. Then Ryu spoke, his voice soft as a breeze slipping through temple stones. Any idea where they're taking us? Jasper glanced over, one brow raised. He shipped his weight, his earlier humor cooling, settling into something more serious now. More guess? He said. The mines. Even Thorak opened an eye at that. Jasper continued, rubbing on a smear of grime on his wrist. I've been here a long time, long enough to know the pattern. When the quota runs short, or the prisoners grow too loud, too troublesome, they pull a group and send them out. Quietly, always at dawn. He looked toward the wagon door, as if he could already see the horizon behind it. I've never been there myself, he said, but I've heard stories. Bad ones. Stone that bleeds when you strike it, tunnels that shift when you sleep, guards who stop using names. Ryu inclined his head. You believe the stories? I believe the ones that don't need exaggerate, Jasper said. Whatever truth lives in them, it's enough. If that's where we're headed, then we're in for a new kind of hell. I can assure you that. A silence followed, this time not the quiet of waiting, but of knowing. The kind of silence that sets in when a storm is no longer on the horizon, but already in the air, thick in your lungs and prickling your skin. I clutched my spellbook tighter. If we're going into the dark, I would not go blind. The murmurs died down. Even Tara's suspicious gaze softened, though only slightly. Jasper leaned back, folding his hands behind his head, as if he hadn't just prophesied our doom. Ryu closed his eyes once more and breathed slow and deep. And me, I opened the book. It felt like opening an old wound and finding, to your surprise, that the pain had become warmth. My fingers found familiar pages, the parchment rough where my ink had soaked through from furious rewriting. I ran my thumb along the margin notes, half spells, half musings, notes like, Juniper makes for a caribou stabilizer, but a decent garnish and bitter stout. And beneath that, could probably freeze an ogre's knee with the right sigil and a sprig of frostleaf. I smiled. There was a heartbeat in these pages, a rhythm I hadn't heard in days. As I flipped past spells and schematics, my mind stirred. Patterns resurfaced, phrases sparked, and I could almost feel the weave rising to greet me again, like an old friend reaching through a crowd. I pressed my palm flat to the vellum and let out a slow, shuddering breath. Home. I could have stayed like that, lost in the quiet hum of regained power. But the moment broke. The sound of hooves again. This time, not the practiced clop of parade or patrol. This was something heavier, harsher, like the ground was flinching beneath it. He rode into view like a nightmare given flesh. A man, tall even from a distance, gaunt as hunger and wrapped in armor black enough to swallow the light. No crest, no color, just shadow shaped into steel. His helm hung at his saddle, and his face was worse for being seen. Sharp angles, sallow skin, and eyes like iron left too long in the cold. He didn't look at us. He didn't need to. We all felt him. His voice cracked like a whip as he barked orders to the guards, crisp and cruel. They moved fast, fear propelling their boots more than duty. Wagons ready, move out. Just 4 words, but they settled into my gut like stones. Chains clinked, wheels groaned, and the cart creaked into motion. The city gate yawned before us, its teeth of iron parting for our passage. I looked down at my spellbook, still open in my lap, my hand still resting on the page. Whatever waited for us in the dark beyond these walls, I would face it, with ink-stained fingers and fire in my palm. Let the world shift, let the minds howl. Thorgrin Ironvein had his voice back, and I was done being silent.